The evening glow of the city's skyline cast long shadows over the bustling streets as Jamal Carter stepped out of his sleek black Mercedes, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored navy blue suit. At 38 years old, he had built a reputation as one of the most successful financial advisors in the city. With a sharp mind and an even sharper sense of style, he exuded the quiet confidence of a man who had worked his way up from nothing. Standing at 6 feet tall, with a neatly groomed beard and skin that glowed under the dim city lights, Jamal was the epitome of self-made success. But despite his wealth, he remained humble, never flaunting his riches, never feeling the need to prove anything to anyone. He had learned early on that true power lay not in showing off, but in knowing exactly who you were. Tonight was supposed to be a rare night of indulgence. His longtime friend and business partner, David Chong, had recommended a newly opened high-end restaurant downtown. "Best steak you'll ever have," David had claimed, insisting that Jamal give it a try. Never one to turn down good food, he had made a reservation under his name and looked forward to a quiet evening alone to reflect on his latest business deal, one that had just made him a multimillionaire. As he approached the grand entrance of La Bellevue, the restaurant radiated exclusivity. A red carpet lined the doorway, where well-dressed patrons entered with an air of entitlement. A valet greeted Jamal with a professional nod, taking his car keys with practiced ease. The moment he stepped inside, he felt the shift in atmosphere, a blend of sophistication and silent judgment. The restaurant's interior was designed to impress. Chandeliers dripped with golden light, casting a soft glow over the elegantly dressed patrons sipping expensive wine from crystal glasses. The air carried the rich aroma of truffle-infused dishes, dry-aged steaks, and decadent desserts. Jamal glanced around, taking in the setting with appreciation. Marble floors gleamed underfoot, and the walls were lined with deep mahogany panels, giving the space a timeless luxury. Every detail had been carefully curated to cater to the city's elite, a playground for the rich and powerful. But as Jamal walked toward the hostess stand, he felt something else. A shift in energy. It wasn't overt, but he had experienced it enough times in his life to recognize it. The subtle glances. The raised eyebrows. The way certain people stiffened ever so slightly. A young hostess with auburn hair and sharp blue eyes looked up as he approached, her gaze flickering over his suit before settling on his face with a polite, yet distant, expression. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" she asked.
"Yes."
"Under Jamal Carter," he replied smoothly. For the briefest moment, her expression faltered, just a flicker of surprise before she masked it with a professional smile. She scanned the reservation list, nodded, and gestured toward the dining area. "Right this way, Mr. Carter." Jamal followed her through the restaurant, passing clusters of well-dressed diners engaged in hushed conversations. He ignored the occasional glance in his direction. He had grown accustomed to this over the years, the way people sometimes hesitated when they saw a black man in a place like this. They reached a corner table near the window, offering a panoramic view of the city's skyline. "Your waiter will be with you shortly," the hostess said before slipping away. Jamal settled into his seat, exhaling slowly. He wasn't here to make a statement. He just wanted to enjoy his meal. A few minutes passed before his waiter arrived, a lean, young man with slicked-back blonde hair and a crisp white uniform. His name tag read Ethan. Jamal instantly picked up on Ethan's demeanor. There was something off about him. He moved with a stiffness that suggested irritation, his lips pressed into a tight line as he approached the table. Ethan didn't offer a greeting. Instead, he placed a menu on the table with a sharp, dismissive motion. "What can I get you?" he asked flatly, not bothering to make eye contact. Jamal raised an eyebrow. He had been in enough fine dining establishments to know this wasn't standard service. He glanced around briefly. Other tables were being attended to with warmth and smiles. Still, he chose to give the waiter the benefit of the doubt. "I'll start with a glass of your house red wine," he said casually, keeping his tone even. Ethan let out the faintest sigh, as if Jamal had just inconvenienced him. "Which one?" he asked. "We have several house selections." Jamal's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his composure. "The Cabernet will do." Ethan scribbled something on his notepad before walking away, without another word. Jamal exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. He didn't jump to conclusions easily, but he knew what this was. The impatient body language, the clipped tone, the lack of eye contact. He had encountered it too many times before. He debated whether to say something or let it slide. Was it worth ruining his night over? As he waited, Jamal let his gaze drift across the restaurant, observing the interactions around him. Other waiters moved with grace and attentiveness, engaging with customers in warm, effortless conversations. Ethan, however, had taken a different tone with him. Jamal had seen it before. Waiters who assumed that because of his skin color, he wasn't a high-paying customer. That he wasn't their type of clientele. It was an unspoken bias that still thrived in places like this, masked under the guise of indifference. He drummed his fingers against the table, weighing his options. He could brush it off and move on with his night. Or he could confront it. But something told him that this evening was about to take a turn. As Ethan returned with his wine, setting the glass down with the same lack of enthusiasm, Jamal made a decision. He wasn't going to let this slide. "Excuse me," he said, looking up at the waiter with a calm but firm gaze. Ethan barely looked at him. "Yeah." Jamal smiled slightly, but there was steel in his voice. "Is there a problem?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "No, sir." Jamal nodded slowly, holding his gaze. "Good. Then I expect the same level of service you're giving everyone else." Ethan's face flushed slightly, but he gave a curt nod before walking away. Jamal took a slow sip of his wine, settling back into his chair. This night was far from over. Jamal sat in silence, his fingers lightly tracing the rim of his wine glass as he watched Ethan move between tables. The young waiter had an entirely different demeanor when serving other patrons, flashing polite smiles, making light conversation, and offering recommendations with enthusiasm. The contrast was undeniable. Jamal wasn't looking for trouble, but he also wasn't the type to let disrespect slide. He had spent years navigating spaces where he was often the only black man in the room, and he had learned how to handle these situations with patience and precision. A few moments later, Ethan returned, standing rigidly by the table with his notepad in hand. "Ready to order?" he asked, his tone still carrying an edge of indifference. Jamal glanced at the menu briefly before setting it down. "I'll have the filet mignon medium rare, with truffle mashed potatoes and grilled asparagus," he said, keeping his voice measured. Ethan scribbled on his pad, without looking up. "Anything else?" Jamal nodded. "A side of the lobster mac and cheese. And another glass of the Cabernet." Ethan barely acknowledged the order before muttering, "Got it," and walking away. Jamal exhaled through his nose. He had dealt with worse, but something about Ethan's attitude irritated him. It was the deliberate rudeness, the unspoken message that Jamal didn't belong here. The restaurant was beginning to fill up, and as Jamal waited for his food, he scrolled through his phone, checking emails and messages. He was used to dining alone, enjoying these quiet moments to reflect on business strategies and future investments. That peace was short-lived. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Ethan talking to another waiter near the bar. What caught his attention wasn't the conversation itself, but the way Ethan glanced toward his table, smirked, and said something that made the other waiter chuckle. Jamal's instincts kicked in. He had seen that kind of look before, the smug amusement of someone who thought they were getting away with something. Then he heard it. "Bet he leaves a trash tip," Ethan muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Probably shouldn't waste my time." Jamal felt a slow burn rise in his chest. His grip on his phone tightened slightly, but outwardly, he remained composed. So that's how it was. He could have ignored it. He could have let it slide like so many times before. But tonight? No. Jamal stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his suit as he made his way toward the bar. The soft hum of conversation filled the space, but as he approached, Ethan noticed him and stiffened slightly. The other waiter quickly turned away, pretending to be busy. Jamal stopped a few feet from Ethan and locked eyes with him. "Got a second?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Ethan hesitated. Yeah. What do you need?" Jamal tilted his head slightly. "Just wanted to clarify something." You seem to think I'm not worth your time. That right? Ethan's face paled slightly. I didn't say that. Jamal smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. No? Because I could have sworn I heard you say something about my tip. Something about how I'm probably not worth it. Ethan glanced around, realizing that a few nearby customers were now listening. His lips pressed into a thin line. Look, I was just joking, man. No offense. Jamal took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Ethan could hear. See, the problem is I've worked too hard to be disrespected by someone who doesn't know the first thing about me. And if you think you can judge me based on how I look, then maybe you're in the wrong line of work. Ethan swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably under Jamal's gaze. Jamal didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone was enough. After a tense moment, he exhaled and stepped back. Now, if you want to start over and do your job right, I'm happy to forget this happened. But if not, he gave a small shrug. I can take my business elsewhere. Ethan hesitated, then finally nodded. I understand. Jamal studied him for a moment longer before turning and walking back to his table. He had made his point, but what happened next would change everything. Jamal returned to his seat, his expression unreadable. He wasn't the type to dwell on minor slights, but Ethan's words lingered in his mind. It wasn't just about the tip, it was the assumption behind it. The kind of assumption that had followed him throughout his life. He picked up his wine glass and took a slow sip, glancing around the restaurant. People were enjoying their meals, engaged in quiet conversations, unaware of the small storm that had just passed between him and the waiter. A few minutes later, Ethan returned with Jamal's order, setting the plate down with slightly more care than before. He didn't make eye contact, didn't offer the fake politeness he had given to other guests. Here you go, Ethan mumbled. Jamal looked at his plate, then back at Ethan. Everything prepared the way I ordered? Ethan nodded quickly. Yeah, should be fine. Jamal raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He picked up his fork and knife, cutting into the filet mignon, noting the way Ethan hovered for a moment before stepping back. The discomfort was clear in his posture. Good. Maybe now, Ethan would think twice before making snap judgments about his customers. The meal was excellent, as expected. Jamal had been to this restaurant before, and he knew the quality of their dishes. But tonight, there was something bitter beneath the flavor. The taste of an experience soured by unnecessary disrespect. When Ethan finally returned, he placed the bill on the table without a word. No, thank you for dining with us. No, hope you enjoyed your meal. Just a receipt, face down, with an air of impatience. Jamal calmly flipped it over. The total came to $275, a high-end meal, even for an upscale place like this. Ethan's arms were crossed as he stood by the table, clearly waiting. Jamal exhaled slowly, then reached for his wallet. As he pulled out his black Centurion American Express card, Ethan's eyes flickered with recognition. Jamal smirked inwardly. Ah, there it is. The shift. The sudden awareness. The dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, he had misjudged the man sitting before him. Ethan cleared his throat. I'll be right back with that. His tone had changed. Jamal handed him the card without a word, leaning back in his seat, watching as Ethan hurried toward the register with a new sense of urgency. From his table, Jamal could see Ethan at the register, swiping the card. A few seconds later, the screen must have shown something unexpected, because Ethan did a double take. His jaw tensed. He typed something into the system, then glanced over at Jamal again. Jamal simply raised his wine glass in acknowledgement. The waiter's expression shifted, an odd mix of surprise and discomfort. He turned to another employee behind the counter, whispering something, and the two exchanged glances before looking back at Jamal. Jamal chuckled under his breath. Here we go. A few moments later, Ethan returned to the table, setting the receipt down with newfound politeness. Mr. Carter, your payment has been processed. Thank you for dining with us tonight. Jamal could practically hear the hesitation in his voice. He glanced down at the receipt, grabbed the pen, and paused before writing. Slowly, deliberately, he added a $500 tip to the bill and signed his name at the bottom. Then, he slid the check presenter across the table toward Ethan. Ethan's eyes widened. "Oh, he stammered, clearly taken aback. "Are you sure?" Jamal leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "You assumed I wouldn't tip well. So now, I want you to sit with that and think about why." Ethan swallowed hard. His face was red, either from embarrassment or frustration. I didn't mean." Jamal held up a hand. "I don't need an apology. Just do better." Ethan hesitated for a moment longer before nodding. He took the receipt, mumbling a quiet, "Thank you," before walking away, shoulders tense. Jamal knew this wasn't about proving a point with money. The tip was irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. What mattered was the lesson, the realization that Ethan would have to carry with him. One assumption had cost him his composure. One moment of bias had left him exposed. Jamal stood up, straightening his suit jacket. As he turned to leave, he noticed a few employees whispering, likely aware of the situation. Some nodded in his direction, a silent acknowledgement of what had just transpired. As he reached the exit, he heard a voice behind him. "Sir, wait." Jamal turned. It was Ethan. The young waiter hesitated, then took a deep breath. I just wanted to say, I'll do better." Jamal studied him for a moment before offering a small nod. "Good." Then, without another word, he walked out the door. What happened tonight wasn't just about a meal. It was about perception, growth, and breaking old habits. And Ethan? Ethan would remember this night for a long time. Ethan stood frozen near the register, gripping the signed receipt as if it held the answer to a question he had never thought to ask himself before. The $500 tip felt heavy in his hands, not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. Jamal had every reason to walk out without tipping a cent. He had every reason to complain, to demand a manager, to call Ethan out in front of the entire restaurant. But instead, he did something much more powerful. He exposed Ethan's own prejudice without raising his voice. The realization settled like a weight in Ethan's chest. Had he really judged this man so quickly? Assumed things about him without knowing a single thing beyond the color of his skin? He felt the stares of his coworkers, some watching with curiosity, others with knowing expressions that made him wonder if this wasn't the first time they had noticed his attitude toward certain customers. Ethan looked back at the receipt. Jamal's signature was smooth, confident, unapologetic. He suddenly felt embarrassed by the way he had treated him. For years, Ethan had excused his biases as just how things are. He had grown up in a mostly white neighborhood, worked in places where few black customers came through, and when they did, he carried unspoken assumptions about how they would behave, how they would tip, and what kind of people they were. Tonight shattered all of that. He had disrespected a man who had done nothing wrong, and that man had turned around and taught him a lesson without ever saying the words directly. Ethan turned and walked toward the employee break room, needing a moment away from the floor. He passed by Lisa, another server, who had clearly been watching everything unfold. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan hesitated before nodding. "Yeah. Just thinking." Lisa folded her arms. "Thinking about how you almost let your attitude cost you a $500 tip?" Ethan flinched. The bluntness of her words hit hard, but he knew she was right. "I was being a jerk," he admitted. "I thought," he stopped himself. He didn't even want to say it out loud. Lisa tilted her head. "You thought what? That he wouldn't tip? That he couldn't afford to eat here?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I don't know. He let out a humorless chuckle. "I didn't even realize how deep that kind of thinking had settled in me." Lisa nodded slowly. "Well, now you do." Ethan looked down at the receipt again, then at the black Centurion American Express card he had so clearly recognized when Jamal handed it to him. The card that only the ultra-wealthy carried. The card that should have shattered all his assumptions in an instant. But why did it take that for him to change his perspective? Why did he have to see proof before he reconsidered his bias? The thought made his stomach turn. Later that night, after the restaurant had closed and Ethan was clocking out, he sat in his car for a long moment, the weight of the evening still pressing on him. He picked up his phone and, on impulse, typed Jamal Carter into Google. Immediately, articles and images popped up. CEO of Carter Investments. Philanthropist. Public speaker. Ethan swallowed. He had unknowingly disrespected a high-profile businessman. But that wasn't even the point. Even if Jamal had been an average guy, someone without wealth or status, the way Ethan had treated him was still wrong. He stared at a photo of Jamal at a charity event, shaking hands with young entrepreneurs. Another article talked about how Jamal had built financial literacy programs for underprivileged communities. Ethan exhaled. He had spent so much time assuming things about people like Jamal that he had never stopped to listen or learn. And now, after a single encounter, he was forced to confront the reality of his own bias. Slowly, he opened his Venmo app. He typed in the restaurant system to find Jamal's name on the customer account and sent back the $500 tip with a simple note. "I don't deserve this, but I promise I'll do better." He hit send. Seconds later, a notification popped up. Message from Jamal Carter.
Keep it.
And remember this moment. Ethan stared at the screen, his throat tight. Tonight had changed him in ways he never expected. The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling different. Not in a dramatic, world-shattering way, but in a way that made everything seem a little clearer. He replayed the night before over and over in his head, his attitude, Jamal's grace, the silent but powerful lesson in that tip, and the final message that lingered in his mind.
Keep it.
And remember this moment. He had expected Jamal to take the money back. That would have made sense. That would have given Ethan closure, allowed him to walk away feeling like he had undone his mistake. But Jamal didn't let him take the easy way out. Instead, he made sure the weight of that $500 stayed with Ethan, not as a reward, but as a reminder. Ethan didn't want to forget. At work that evening, Ethan paid close attention to how he served each table. He caught himself in moments where he might have once made silent judgments. An older black couple walked in, dressed casually, and without thinking, his mind started to wander. Would they tip well? Could they afford this restaurant? But this time he stopped himself. He refused to let his assumptions dictate his attitude. Instead, he approached them with the same warmth and professionalism he would give any other customer. He took their orders with a smile, recommended his favorite dishes, and made sure they had the best dining experience possible. When they left, he picked up the receipt and saw they had tipped 25%. He didn't feel smug, nor did he feel like it was a reward for doing the right thing. Instead, he felt something deeper, relief. He wasn't proud that they tipped well. He was proud that, for the first time, it wouldn't have mattered if they hadn't. As the night slowed down, Lisa leaned against the counter near Ethan and raised an eyebrow. "You seem different today," she observed. Ethan chuckled softly.
Yeah.
"I guess I am." Lisa smirked. "You Google him, didn't you?" Ethan sighed.
Yeah.
She nodded. "Jamal Carter's a legend. But you know what's wild?"
What?
Lisa tilted her head. "You shouldn't have to Google a black man to respect him." Her words hit harder than Ethan expected. She wasn't saying it to be cruel, just honest. And the truth was, she was absolutely right. Jamal's wealth and status shouldn't have been what changed Ethan's mind. He should have been better before knowing any of that. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, nodding slowly. "I know, but I'm working on it." Lisa gave him a small smile. "That's all anyone can do." At the end of his shift, Ethan took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. He opened Venmo again, staring at the message from Jamal.
Keep it.
And remember this moment. He tapped on the screen and typed out a response. "Thank you. Not just for the tip, but for the lesson. I won't forget it." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "If you ever come back, your next meal's on me." He sent the message, unsure if Jamal would ever respond. But that wasn't the point. Jamal had already given him something far more valuable than money. He had given him a new perspective. And for Ethan, that was worth more than anything.